Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Krogdahl and Ville Sointu, this is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Fintech Daydreaming. My name is Ville Sointu and I will be host for this episode today. And as is tradition, with me sharing the virtual microphone today is my good friend and co-host of the show, Krogdahl. Paul, how is life?
Life is, as always, Ville, really good. Yes.
Yeah, sun is shining here in the beautiful suburb of Espoo near Helsinki, and yeah, life is looking really good. We got to a really good start with season 3. We've had some fantastic guests so far, and I guess today we will also not disappoint on the guest front either. But I guess we have to ask: do we have a joke from the listeners this time?
Don't we always?
Oh, yeah.
We've got fantastic listeners that they do send us jokes. I have to admit, I mean, some of the jokes that we are getting are maybe a bit borderline. We wouldn't be too comfortable reading them out on a show like this. So, but a lot of them have been good, sticking to the tradition of very bad, but good jokes. And based on the guest we've got here with us today, you know, I had to pick out one of the blockchain jokes. I'm sorry. And so it goes like this, Ville. What did the one blockchain say to the other blockchain?
Maybe this is a Polkadot reference that I'm not aware of, but please tell me.
Don't mind me. I'm just forking.
Oh, God, no, please. Okay. We love all the jokes. We love they're from our listeners. We love our listeners. We love the jokes. So please keep them coming. That was actually a pretty perfect joke for our guest today, because on with the show. So I guess our listeners are not here to listen to us talk about weather or bad jokes, or for that matter, how sunny it is in Finland today. But this is particularly true today when we have a guest who is, at least for me, perhaps one of the most anticipated guests that we've had so far in our podcast. Richard Brown is the Chief Technology Officer of R3 and has been with R3 since the very beginning. For those of you listening who might not be familiar with R3 and its origins, I'm sure we'll get to that soon with our guest joining us. But the short story of R3 really is that it was founded in the middle of the enterprise blockchain hype when they figured out that somebody needs to calm things down a little bit and get financial institutions together to see how this new technology could be used to evolve the industry instead of just blowing it up like most of the Bitcoin crowd seemed to suggest back then. I guess to a certain extent, they're still doing that. But R3 was definitely in the right place at the right time because over the years, they have become really synonymous with DLT, or distributed ledger technology adoption, in the regulated financial services space in particular. And as I've heard, also outside of financial services lately as well. But then again, who am I to tell this story when we have Richard here with us? So welcome to the show, Richard. We're absolutely delighted to have you on with us today. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you, and thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here, and I never ever apologize for talking about the weather. You've got a Brit on. That's all we ever talk about.
Yeah, that's true. It's becoming a bit of a meme, I guess, in our podcast, because we spend at least 2-3 minutes every episode talking about the weather. But that's what you're supposed to do. Good. But as we mentioned in the intro, you are today the CTO of R3 and really one of the most respected experts in your field. But could you tell our listeners a bit more about your background leading up to your current role at R3?
Yeah, sure. So as you say, I lead the sort of the technology team, if you like, at R3. But my entire career before R3 was at IBM, and it's only when you look back on a career you realize just how formative some experiences were, or how things that you did turned out to be really useful in the future, or things that you learned because of the organization's professionalism or culture turned out to be more important than you realized at the time. But the net of it is, my entire career before R3 was in various technical roles in IBM. I joined IBM as a graduate straight from university, and worked for the IBM Hursley Lab, which is a huge software development site in the south of England, responsible for some really sort of game-changing products that people in in day-to-day life would never have heard of, but which the entire world kind of relies on. Products like Kix, a huge mainframe platform, MQ Series that moves data around the world reliably between firms. Really big, important middleware technologies. So I started working at Hursley actually in QA, in test, and then I went through a variety of roles where the things I learned about the product allowed me to go out and explain it to customers, do proofs of concept in the field, compete against IBM's smaller, often more nimbler competitors, who proved that we too could win in the market, at various consulting roles, pre-sales roles, and then finally in my final few years at IBM, focusing exclusively on banking and financial markets. And it was around that time that I discovered, like many people, Bitcoin, and began to form this view and began to realize that it could be, or the underlying concept could be relevant to banks. And I guess my journey to R3 culminated when I spent a lot of time understanding Bitcoin and blockchain and writing blog posts and talking about it in ways that the financial people could understand. And I spent a lot of time explaining banking and financial services to the cryptocurrency people. So I kind of ended up bridging the gap between the two. And then it was just like serendipity, but I guess it's just the right time that when R3 came onto the scene, it was a way to really test some of my ideas and test them to destruction, if you like.
Yeah, I still remember the time in 2015 or so when everybody in the banking sector was asking, what is this blockchain thing? Should we be worried about it? And the people like you yourself and people at R3 in general were really kind of good at being this kind of blockchain whisperer, if you will, for the bankers. And you still are. These concepts, even though they've been around and we've been around this stuff for ages now, it's still fairly unknown to many in this industry. And I guess it's a bit of a tragedy of blockchain in general, is that it became such a big hype, and to a certain extent it is even still today, yet it is fundamentally a back end or infrastructure level technology. So maybe that's part of the reason why it hasn't really kind of lived up to the hype of many people that have been working kind of around this space. For us in this space, of course, we've seen the benefits already to a certain extent, at least. But I'm sure there will be multiple books written about in the future about R3, its journey, and how its story kind of unfolded over the years. But as we wait for the publishers to sort it all out with the authors, could you perhaps, Richard, recap the story so far and perhaps reflect how different phases in R3's history have affected where you are today?
Yeah, the idea of thinking about it in terms of phases, I think, is a good one, because I can certainly think of probably three distinct phases in the life or evolution of R3. So, and to summarize, they are R3 as a consortium of financial institutions, and then R3 as the firm that brought Corda, our open source blockchain platform, to market, and then the transformation of R3 into a moving away from being a consortium and becoming what we are now, which is a software firm where Corda and now Conclave are our products. But if I go into those very briefly, just to sort of paint the picture, as you say, we came to prominence in 2015. However, not many people know this. I actually wasn't with R3 at the start. It turns out for about a year, literally a year, the co-founders of R3 had been working really hard, really diligently around the world, trying to pull the idea together. So the CEO of R3 is a very impressive guy called David Rutter. His entire career was Wall Street, financial markets, derivatives, broking, things like that. So he knew all the key people in the industry. And his realization was, or I guess his bet was, this blockchain thing, we don't know what the opportunity is. We don't really know what it means. We need to pull people together for that. We need to hire the right people. But if there is any applicability at all to financial services, this is going to be a team sport. It's going to be a consortium thing, because a blockchain of one node makes no sense. It's going to be about multiple firms working together. And I think the thing that people don't necessarily know about him is, although he's primarily, his entire career was in financial markets, his career was punctuated by the creation of various industry initiatives or consortia. So he has this knack. I think he's some sort of masochist, because he has this knack of pulling together people who need to work together but are fierce competitors, and getting all these people aligned. He'd done that many times before, so he was kind of the right person at the right time to pull together this consortium. So net, when I joined R3 and left IBM, it was a risk. It was a 1-year contract. It was R3 has got this contract with lots of banks to figure out what the opportunity the opportunity of blockchain might be. We don't know, but if we work together, if we pool our resources, maybe we'll figure it out. So I led working groups, the architecture working group. What are the key foundational principles? What use cases do we have that could match to it? What requirements would an underlying platform need to have to bridge the gap? And from that work, emerged the initial design concepts and design studies of what became Corda. The banks renewed their membership. We realized we were onto something. Corda was becoming successful. People were adopting it. We had a commercial version of the open source code base, and that enabled us to do our Series A in 2017, which at the time I think was one of the largest Series A's in history, funded primarily by the banks who were our members. And that then allowed us to really put our foot to the floor and really build out Corda, get it to the level of production quality we needed, help our clients get the solutions live. And that began us on the transition from what began as this consortium to what we are now, which is a software firm with Corda as the core of our offering. And that really brings us to present day. We build, we support the Corda community. We're the primary committer to the Corda code base, and then we sell it. We're a commercial firm. We sell the commercial version to firms who see an opportunity, whether it's HQLAX or whether it's B3I, whoever it is. They see a business problem in their markets. They think they can build a solution to it using Corda, bring all the key participants together to collectively change how their business processes work. And then they pay us some money for the software. They make money themselves. So it's kind of a win-win. But we're the platform provider, and then there's a network of application developers. So that's kind of it. A really interesting journey. And now, I guess, as we'll come on to a bit later, from that we discovered there was actually an adjacent market that we could also address, and that's why we were in fact, on the day of recording tomorrow, we'll be launching our Conclave platform. But I shouldn't get ahead of myself. We'll come to that later.
Yeah. Let's see the future stuff to the end. Towards the end. But I want to kind of circle back a little bit on something that you said, because this just kind of occurred to me, is that when we kind of came from the permissionless space, the Bitcoin space, the Ethereum space, which these ecosystems networks are built on basically nobody trusting anyone. So basically it's a trustless architecture, trustless infrastructure. But now when we move this into the world of banking and we move into the permissioned space of distributed ledger technology, it's like you said, it's really bringing these banks together, these institutions together, and agreeing to a certain extent, trusting each other. They're kind of creating almost like a mirror universe of the trustless side of things. So that's kind of driving these worlds maybe a little bit apart from each other. But
yes.
Looking back at that, what do you think are the kind of main learnings or main challenges that you've been able to find and then overcome over the years as we've seen this permissioned technology developing?
It's a really interesting one. So I guess if I say the primary, I guess there are two primary challenges and then a whole bunch of secondary ones. So the first, I guess, this is true for, I guess, all anybody who's trying to change how things work. The default behavior of almost everybody in every context is to do nothing or to stick with what they're already doing. So I think it took us a long time to to get really clear in our own minds about what problems does enterprise blockchain actually solve. Where is Corda a really good fit? Because there's always almost like the activation energy, or there's some bar you have to reach to justify a change or justify doing something. So identifying those is hard, and because you have to get multiple firms to move at once, which is the second challenge, the bar is necessarily higher. So if I'm being honest, it's some of these projects have taken longer to bring to production status than perhaps I anticipated. But then at the same time, I think that's always true. If you knew how long and hard something would be before you started, you'd never do it. So you have to have this almost like you have to have this insane belief that it will work. It's the only way you're ever going to change anything. So there's that. But then you look at what's live. Just one example. Given the fintech context, down in Italy, 90+% of the banks in Italy are using Corda to massively improve how those banks reconcile with each other and stay in sync. But it was a long journey, because this is the secondary thing now. The challenges you have to overcome. The whole point, I guess, of the thing we're solving is enabling multiple firms in a market to transact directly without friction, so that they know that they see the same thing as each other. Everybody's in sync. That means multiple firms have to move at once, but it means there are multiple IT teams you have to talk to. It's hard enough getting something through the people who say no at one bank, getting it through the people who say no at 20 banks. That's 20 times harder. So it's a difficult path, but then of course the payoff and the benefits when you achieve it are so much higher. So it's a lot we've learned, but also really exciting journey as we got there.
I'd actually like to a little bit change direction, but go back to the history you've had there on both R3, but also yourself. Coming from IBM, I am still at IBM. We were, before we started recording, talking a little bit about the history of us two working together very early on and having discussions around blockchain. Now, obviously, I found it really interesting very recently when I saw stories around a partnership or collaboration that's being kicked off now between R3 and IBM. What's happening here? Do you want to share a little bit on this partnership?
Yeah, it's so nice to see it happening. And maybe before I get to the partnership, just a little bit of a background, because I must admit, I felt quite uncomfortable in 2015 and 16, because I'd left IBM to join R3. We discovered the need there's an opportunity, and we discovered the requirements for a platform, and we began the work on what became Corda. And I think, frankly, I think some of my former colleagues at IBM, I think some of them were genuinely sad. Some of them, I think, were a bit hurt that we didn't naturally gravitate to Hyperledger Fabric or directly use a platform that was already in existence. And there were good reasons for that, not least because we were fortunate that we had this direct access to the users, and we needed to go a different path. But it necessarily put us on not a collision course, but it meant that the R3 ecosystem, and back then the Hyperledger ecosystem, which included IBM, were effectively competitors. Now, of course, in many ways, competition is good. The media loves a fight, and if two firms, if there's arguments between them, it's good for everybody, because all news is good news. But it did create tension, and given that's the firm I came from, that was always hard. So as our products matured, as we understood where they fitted, what became apparent was, Fabric is actually really good for these things. Corda is good for these things. So customers are genuinely choosing one or another for a good reason. There's a really good guy at IBM in the UK called Andy Martin, who has done so much work both to popularize blockchain, but also to help explain where one works and where one doesn't. So I think as we matured, we began to realize that it's never a zero-sum game. There's always chances to work together. And the breakthrough actually came from, when I used to be at IBM, was what was called the IBM Systems Group. But it was the people building a platform called Linux One. So think of a very high quality, secure Linux. It's running on what we used to call a mainframe, but you'd never know. It's just it's high quality Linux in the cloud. And this team realized, if we could get Corda running on that, we, the IBM Linux One team, could add value to Corda. We could make it run more securely. We could make it easier to integrate it with existing sort of heritage and enterprise systems. And of course, it's an extra thing for the IBM Cloud and the IBM Services teams to sell as well. So it was a nice way to come together, where there was a genuine synergy on both sides. It brings Corda to a new market, and it allows the unique differentiators, in IBM's case, of the Linux One platform, and even things like HyperProtect on the security side. It allows those unique differentiators to be showcased. So it wasn't what I was expecting. The day that it was announced that IBM was doing something with Corda, I mean, that was that would have happened 3 years earlier. And the great thing is, it was not a rejection. It is not a rejection of Hyperledger Fabric. These two things are complementary, and it's the usual thing: the right tool for the right job. So the partnership it's really great.
No, it's fantastic, and I think, like you said, it's a win-win for everybody, right? The customers, for IBM, for R3, and also back to what you were saying about the competitive nature. We all know that competition drives innovation. So it's always been good to have these different flavors of blockchains that are helping us to motivate each other to be better, to drive new innovation, and to push the whole field of blockchain going forwards. But I think definitely the ability to be able to offer in the future going forwards R3 as a blockchain on a mainframe environment, Linux One, I think that's a really, really interesting proposition. And I for one, I'm very excited about that collaboration between our two organizations. But yes, in addition to the whole Corda platform, you've also been talking a lot, and you mentioned it a minute ago now as well, Conclave, and the whole idea of secure data processing, etc. What is Conclave? I mean, it's very new. You're about to announce it, etc. I'd be interested, and I'm sure that our listeners would be really keen to understand more about what is this, where's it going, and what's behind it.
Sure. So I'll answer your question directly, and then I'll explain what I mean. So Conclave is a tool for building confidential computing applications. But the problem with that description, and it's why the marketing team wants to kill me every time I say it, is nobody knows what a confidential computing application is. So I've neither answered the question nor conveyed any value. So I need to go back and explain what I meant. And to understand it, it's probably worth going back to why we started work on it in the first place. When we started designing Corda, the thing that our customers and our members kept telling us was privacy, 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 privacy. You're going to be sharing data with other firms because they have to be in sync. But how do you know that data won't be going to the wrong place? How do you know that the wrong people won't see it? So a lot of Corda's design gives you that out of the box. That was almost the key design goal. But we always knew that it was never going to be enough for some of the most advanced scenarios. So we looked around and said, we need a general purpose solution to securing or ensuring privacy on blockchains. And there was a lot of talk back then about homomorphic encryption. IBM's invested a lot in that, zero knowledge proofs, things like that. But where we alighted was we said, a full general purpose solution, we need it in the short to medium term. And hardware techniques probably the way to go, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, because it almost seems too good to be true. But there are hardware techniques known as confidential computing that really can change the game with privacy. So we started looking at them and building solutions for Corda. A year or two ago, we realized, well, hang on, this thing we built for our own purposes, and we spent a lot of time making it easy to use. We said, actually, this thing is actually the basis of its own product. So let's start doing some market research. Let's figure out whether there actually is demand for it. And the answer was there is, we believe, and I'll tell you why in a second. And so we put our foot to the floor on accelerating this into its own offering. But what is it? And what do I mean by confidential computing? And the idea is, think today, if I send data to somebody else, I go onto facebook.com and I enter my details, I know that when I click submit, that little padlock in the browser tells me that it's only Facebook who will receive that data. Or if I'm a bank sending data to the regulator, I can use the same types of techniques to know that it's only the regulator who's going to receive that data. But in neither case do I have any technological way of knowing what they will do with that data when they receive it. I know it's protected on its way to them. I know it's getting only to them. But once they receive it, it's completely unconstrained. They can do what they like. And of course, that's what we accept today. But our kind of vision is in 5-10 years, just as you'd never use a web browser without a padlock, we're thinking, in the future, it will be utterly negligent if you send data to somebody else without having put a constraint on it that says how it can be used. And confidential computing lets you do that. IBM has HyperProtect. The one we're currently using, because it had a specific feature we needed, is Intel's software guard extensions. It's called SGX. But the net is, it allows you as a service provider, so this is what Conclave does now. You can write an application, maybe it performs some analytics, maybe it implements an exchange matching algorithm, whatever it is. You write an application that is going to receive data from your customers. So you are going to receive sensitive data from other people. You write it using Conclave. And then the power it gives you is you can then prove to those customers what will happen to their data when they send it to you. They can review the source code. You can prove to them that that is the code that is actually running. And you can prove to them that that is the only code that can see their data. So even if you as a service provider want to cheat, even if you as a service provider have a rogue employee who's trying to extract that data, they can't, because the only thing that can see that data whilst it's being used, whilst it's in use, is the chip on which the code is running. So net, Conclave is a way to write applications that can prove to their users how their data will be processed, and in so doing, massively drive up the amount of trust. And then maybe my final point is, okay, why R3? Why the Corda company? Well, one, because as I say, we began working on this because that feature is massively valuable for blockchains, but also it fits exactly the same DNA. Back to your question about the phases, we began as this collaborative consortium working with all the firms in an industry. Then we developed and delivered Corda, which is about enabling applications that solve problems for entire industries. And that was all about synchronizing data. And now with Conclave, we're able to solve problems for industries where the problem is bringing data together for mutual processing, but where nobody learns anything they shouldn't. So it's all part of that market level DNA, if you like. But net, Conclave, write applications where you can prove how they will process the data they receive.
I know that some of our listeners listening right now are thinking about this, so I have to ask this. You mentioned that Conclave is using Intel SGX in the background. Now, we've seen some controversy with regards to Intel SGX and some of the vulnerabilities around it. Are you concerned about those at all?
Yeah, we keep a very close eye on this. So for the benefit of your listeners who haven't seen that, so each of the major chip manufacturers has a trusted execution environment or a confidential computing platform that they offer. So ARM's chips have these, ARM's designs have this thing called Trust Zone. AMD has something called SEV. Intel has something called SGX. And SGX, I think, came first. SGX has the most, if you like, it has the most ambitious threat model, and it's the one that's most widely deployed. And as a result, it's the one that all the world security researchers are focusing on and trying to break. And there have been some high profile examples of where they've been able to find ways in. Some of it's been enabled by faulty assumptions or no longer valid assumptions in how chips work in general. Some of them have been unique to SGX. The way we've been approaching this, and I guess the basis of our strategy, is twofold. So one is there's all technology goes through a maturity curve. So the fact that people are looking at it and finding ways to break it, that's good, because all new technologies have faults. So the sooner they're found and the sooner there are people finding them, the sooner they can be fixed. And that seems to be playing out, because if we look at the issues people find, they're becoming ever more obscure and ever more difficult to exploit. So it kind of feels like that maturity curve is flushing through. Second thing is, and this is a comment about Intel versus AMD now, and so I don't want to be careful about what I say, but so far at least, every improvement Intel has needed to make to SGX, they've been able to do through software or firmware updates. So they've been able to fix it in the field through what amounts to a software update. None of the silicon they've shipped has ever had to be thrown away. They've planned for this. They call it a trusted computing base and recovery. They've planned for it and they've executed that process. So yeah, no software is perfect, no hardware is perfect, but the bet we're making is it's significantly stronger than what you'd have without it, and it's getting better all the time. But we're not at all blasé about that. And then the final point, I guess, is the reason why we went with that architecture to first is, one, it's the most advanced of the generally available ones from the main chip manufacturers, but also its threat model is based on absolutely minimizing the piece of code that has to be protected. So you put just the sensitive part of your application inside SGX. That's the bit you have to secure. That's the bit you have to audit. And we help with that. Everything else runs as normal. So the surface that could be attacked is massively smaller than in some of the models. So yeah, I'm not at all, I never relax about this, but there's a strategy underpinning what we're doing that I think is working out.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm sure our listeners are very happy to hear those comments, that you have a very open and honest approach about this. And I do agree. The more traffic you have in any platform, whatever that might be, the more vetted it really is in the future. Now, talking about the future in general, so what's next for you and R3? Is there anything exciting that we should be looking forward to in the near future?
Yep. So there's several. So I guess we talked about the IBM partnership, but there's then the next stage of that is actually shipping the versions of Corda Enterprise that run on Linux One. So that's coming down the line. Conclave ships very soon, and we already have many prospects and customers building prototypes on that, and seeing them come to market will be really exciting. And just on that one, I kind of see our job as being both to make these applications ridiculously easy to write. That's where we're focusing with Conclave. It's about very simple APIs and making it easy. But also I see our responsibility as making people understand that this exists. This idea of protecting data whilst it goes somewhere else, most people don't know that's possible. So part of the job is actually telling people it exists, saying, did you know you can now send data somewhere and know exactly what will happen to it? So teaching people that exists. And then on the Corda side, there's a huge amount of work going on to make sure that we continue to move the Corda platform in the direction that customers want. So there's sort of like the mundane things like constantly upgrading, making sure we're supporting the latest versions of Java, dull but important, and then some really interesting features coming down the line in Corda 5. So it's weird, this far into lockdown, you kind of worry, will you lose momentum? You haven't seen your colleagues for months, and you think, maybe one day the phone will just stop ringing. And I've never been busier, and I get the sense it's true for many people. So yeah, 2021 is going to be busy, I think.
Yeah, I'm especially looking forward to the lockdown ending, so I can get back to CordaCon, my favorite event of any given that I've been to in this kind of conference cycle of things. But thank you, Richard. Time flies when you're having fun, but unfortunately, it's time to move to our final segment of the episode, which is, of course, same, but different. Now, here is where we talk about a story that we picked over the week to talk about something that is not directly connected to the topics of the day, even though, as is tradition, it is a little bit connected this time as well. The easy answer would have been to choose the GameStop story, because that's what everybody is talking about. But there's also something else that is at least equally interesting that came up at the past few days, which is that Tesla has decided to buy $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, or actually has said that they have already done that, and plans to accept it as a payment method for buying Tesla cars. Well, wow. There's so much to unpack there. First of all, I guess we don't really know what they plan to do with this Bitcoin and what are the plans. But Richard, what are your thoughts about Elon Musk and Bitcoin?
Because I have a few. I mean, the first one is, God, you wouldn't want to be on his board of directors, would you? I'm trying to control that guy. But the thing that I thought was really interesting was one about just like, his ability to move the market. He changes his Twitter ID, his Twitter summary, and suddenly the market goes nuts. But the thing I saw yesterday, and maybe this ties into GameStop as well, that I must admit I haven't verified it, so it may have been faked, but I think it is true. Somebody posted a link to a Reddit, I guess a Reddit comment from a month ago, where somebody claiming to be a Tesla employee said he'd been asked to write the algo that was buying the Bitcoin. So it was buying a small amount automatically, and then if the price changed, it bought more. So if that's true, and we need to go check it, somebody on Reddit said a month ago that that Tesla is in the market to buy. And then when you think about the effect that the Wall Street Bets subreddit had, Reddit is, if that's true, Reddit is becoming the place to go if you can filter through the noise for really high quality market moving news. It's like, who'd have thought it?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see somebody actually write some kind of a data mining bot for Reddit.
Yeah.
These patterns at some point in time, and then start to speculate on that. But what about you, Paul? Any thoughts on Tesla and Bitcoin?
Lots of thoughts. I mean, back to a little bit like Richard just said, I think Reddit is going to become a new tool for most traders, I think, going forwards. I mean, we're seeing repeatedly the ability to use social media or almost social engineering to affect markets, to affect, value of goods. And Elon Musk, as you said, is he's famous for doing this, right? He has had his stock prices going up, going down, and getting impacted by his tweets, etc. I think it's an interesting position for them to look at Bitcoin, having the ability to buy the cars in the future using Bitcoin. I don't know if they're planning on extending this out to their charging stations and charging networks, enabling customers to pay for charging their Teslas using Bitcoin. I've always viewed Bitcoin more as an investment asset rather than a replacement for cash. I don't think Bitcoin would ever be able to scale to that sort of level. But I could always be wrong in this. I'm not an expert in Bitcoin. I've just been following it from a sort of on the fence position. I think, if I'm honest, Elon is doing what Elon does best. He's utilizing the global scale, or the global stage, to drive visibility and positive impact towards him, his companies, and at the end of the day, the bottom dollar that he has in his pockets. So whatever we think, it was again another smart move to get visibility and focus on him and his companies, right?
Yeah, I guess ultimately that's the goal of anything that he does. More attention, more profits. And you brought up a very interesting point, which is that Bitcoin in general, the only thing that it has proven to do is that it goes up in value. It goes down every now and then, but it generally tends to go up. Now we'll see if that's a sustainable thing, but if the assumption is that Bitcoin goes up, and that if you talk to anybody who has bought ever or using Bitcoin, that's the one thing that they want. They want the number to go up so they can actually get profits out of that. Now, why would you ever want to spend a single Bitcoin or a fraction of a Bitcoin if you think that that the number will go up? So I think that dilemma really hasn't been answered properly in the whole Bitcoin narrative. Who would actually spend any of this stuff because the assumption is that it's an investment that will increase in value over time. But fantastic. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, especially you, Richard. It's a fantastic way to close out this episode today, as unfortunately we have run out of time. Richard, Paul and I would like to give you a chance to let the listeners know how can they find you and get in touch.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for having me. So you can reach me directly, richard@r3.com. And if you want to find out more about R3 or our products, go to r3.com, and given we're launching it imminently, conclave.net is the place to head.
Great stuff. And thank you again for coming on the show and sharing some great experiences and insights with us and our listeners here today. But most importantly, thank you, our dear listeners, for hanging out with us for another episode of Fintech Daydreaming. Now, do you have a fintech subject that you would like us to cover in a future episode? Or maybe you have a great story to share and would like to join us as a guest? Or did you come up with a banking joke that you think other listeners might love, or indeed love to hate? Now, send us an email on hello@fintechdaydreaming.com, or ping us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, or anchor.fm page, and do get in touch. Paul and I will be back in 2 weeks' time with another new guest. So see you all again then. This has been Fintech Daydreaming.